How do you want me to introduce that? Yeah, just the marshmallows. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're ready to start our last session of the Congress, the closing ceremony, and we have, I think, quite a packed program if we're all going to go home to lunch and to our weekend happy. We're going to start with a prize-giving ceremony, a couple of awards, the Marsh Awards and then the Global Seed Conservation Challenge. And I want to kick this off by introducing and inviting Oliver Bogue from the Marsh Christian Trust to come up and tell us about this particular award, because we run it every year and we would like all of you to participate in this and tell us who your champions are in future years. So Oliver, if I can just invite you up here. Thank you.
Hello everybody. The Marsh Christian Trust was founded in 1981 as a grant-making body by its chairman, Brian Marsh. Over the past 30 years, the Trust has developed an award scheme to provide recognition to those who work to improve the world we live in. Recipients of the Marsh Awards are always people who have made a difference by selflessly contributing their efforts to causes that they believe in. The awards, run in partnership with the Botanic Gardens Conservation International, form part of a larger scheme of 75 awards that the Trust runs in partnership with external organisations spanning across the areas of heritage, social welfare, the arts and conservation. The Marsh Award for International Plant Conservation is being presented for the 4th time this year. The award recognises an individual in the early or mid stages of their career who have made a significant achievement in the conservation of rare and endangered plant species and plant diversity. The Marsh Award for Education in Botanic Gardens is also being presented for the 4th time this year. The award recognises somebody also in the early or middle stages of their career who has made an outstanding contribution to promoting public awareness of the importance of plants or who has undertaken an impactful education activity within the Botanic Garden sphere. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm really delighted to make this first award, which is for education in Botanic Gardens. And this goes to Amy Padolf from Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden in Florida. I'm particularly delighted about this one because I've had the pleasure of visiting Fairchild Garden on a number of occasions and seeing firsthand what Amy does. And many of you will be familiar with the Fairchild Challenge that comes out of that excellent institution, and really innovative approaches to education. I'm not going to read the citation, I'm just going to do this from memory. So the things that I've seen that really made an impact are the Million Orchid Project, which is getting endemic orchids back into the landscape and into the urban landscape in and around Miami, involving school children, but also citizen science and doing something that people said could never be done, and that is teaching amateurs to do tissue culture. And if you get the chance to go to Fairchild, you'll see that in action. That's Amy. I was there last year, and I don't know how many of you have seen The Martian. I hope many of you have. Well, a celebrity botanist in that. And of course, Fairchild is not far away from NASA headquarters in Florida. And having seen The Martian, where you'll recall Matt Damon grows potatoes on Mars to survive and calls himself the botanist, Amy and Carl went to see NASA just to maybe have a discussion about whether there was something of interest that came out of this movie. And they expected to be, I think, met by a junior person within NASA, but found themselves speaking to the director of the institute and sitting around the table with them. And it turns out that NASA really would like to know which kind of vegetables can be grown on a mission to Mars. And between them, they designed a growth chamber that would fit in a spaceship, and they distributed that to schools in the area, and the schools grew in an experimental design, I think, was it 36 varieties of vegetables to see which ones perform best under these. And how cool is that? I mean, they all came away with NASA badges and so on, and it's science working together. So that's Amy. Amy, I'd like to invite you up here to accept your award. I'm not sure where you are. There you are. Thank you. So Amy actually has to dash off to catch a train at this moment, so I think we will, if you see her running out of the auditorium, that's the reason. Right, our next award, which is for contributions to plant conservation, goes to Olukunye Olasupo, who's from the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture in Nigeria. Kunle for short, can't be with us today, but Denny Bowen, who's from the same institution, is here to accept his award on his behalf. And he's been employed by IATA as a field supervisor. He's obtained a national diploma in forestry at the Federal College of Forestry in Ibadan, a higher national diploma in agronomy at the Federal College of Agriculture in 2006, and a postgraduate diploma in forestry and wood technology. His interest in trees dates back from his placement through the Student Industrial Work Experience in 2004 at the Center for Environment Renewable Natural Resources Management, Research and Development, when he was trained by Dr. David Ladipo, who's the Executive Director of CENRAD and an alumni of the Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh. His commitment to tree conservation developed during the Leventis Forest projects and became a passion through two further projects, the Tree Heritage Park and Schools Forest, funded by the Leventis Foundation. And prioritizing and protecting Nigeria's most threatened trees, the second project started in 2015 and was led by BGCI with funding from the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. And that has continued through 2017 with support from the Australian Development Aid Programme and the Stanley Smith Horticultural Fund. In his citation, it says that Kunle never misses an opportunity to explain the importance of trees in conserving biodiversity and providing the basics for sustaining human lives. Whatever someone has in mind when visiting the nursery or inquiring about trees, they are persuaded to plant Nigeria's trees for Nigeria's people. So I'd like to invite Denny to come up and accept this award on behalf of Kunle, and I know that you will send him our very best wishes when you go back to Nigeria. Thank you. Right, our next awards are for the Global Seed Conservation Challenge. And for those of you who were in Dunedin, you may recall actually in this very ceremony that the Global Seed Conservation Challenge was launched by BGCI. 3 years later, I'm delighted to say we have around 200 gardens signed up to the challenge. And of course, part of the challenge is going out there and doing seed conservation work, but it's also about being recognized for that work. So this is the first time that we have run these awards for the Global Seed Conservation Challenge. There are 5 awards that we'll be presenting today. For 4 of them, we have people here, and for the 5th, we will send the award over with our best wishes and thanks. I'd like to introduce Catherine O'Donnell from BGCI, who heads our seed conservation program, who's going to read out the citations.
Thank you. So the first award goes to Australian Plant Bank for making the greatest progress in seed conservation, and this is based on plant search records for the number of species banked. So Damien Wrigley from the Australian Seed Bank Partnership is here to accept the award on their behalf. So the second award goes to Amman Botanic Garden for banking the most useful species. They've collected and banked Aloe dafarensis, which is an important medicinal plant used by the Jabali community in southern Oman. So Gudani Al-Isi is here to accept the award. The third award goes to Harold L. Lyon Arboretum in Hawaii for conserving the rarest species. So seed was collected from Selene perlmani, which has a population of less than 20 individuals and is now extinct in the wild. Matthew Kerr from the Plant Conservation Network in Hawaii is here to accept the award on their behalf. The fourth award goes to our host, Conservatoire et Jardin Botanique de la Ville de Genève, for conserving the most difficult to collect species. They've conserved Typha minima, a species thought previously not to be seed bankable, but they've overcome this by bringing drying cabinets out into the field, a really innovative way of conserving seed. So Catherine Lambelet from the Garden Seed Bank is here to accept the award. So there is a fifth award for the garden that's conserved the greatest proportion of threatened species, and this goes to Buck Tower Garden in Florida. Their collection is more than 90% threatened species. There's no one here to accept the award on their behalf, but we will be sending it to them. So you can collect it.
Thank you, Catherine. Right, we have, as I say, a very interesting program ahead, and we're now going to hear from Chipper Wichman, who I'm sure many of you know very well, Executive Director of the National Tropical Garden in Hawaii. And Chipper is going to talk to us about the global strategy for plant conservation as a framework for driving plant conservation action in Hawaii. Chipper.
Aloha, good morning. I'm glad you're still awake. Okay. In Hawaii, we're very informal, so you can respond. It can be interactive here. You know, Paul, when he invited me to come and speak to you today, he sent me a letter, and in it he said, "Our challenges are cultural rather than technical. We need to persuade our own professional community that we can make a difference." I think it would be very inspiring for them to hear about what you have done to both create the Hawaii Strategy for Plant Conservation and host the World Conservation Congress, the most successful conservation gathering in the history of the world. Let me tell you, I think it's been equally inspiring for me every one of these 5 days to have heard the stories from every one of you. I come away from these meetings so enriched and empowered to move forward that it's kind of a hard act to follow after being exposed to so much all of you have to offer. But let me give you the chance. Put on your seatbelt because we're going to go through a lot of slides really quickly because I also have a train to catch. So, so here we go. And I've actually modified my title a little bit. It is about the GSPC, which is an incredible framework, but it's also about the tale of two gardens in Hawaii and how we can be agents of change. And I'm going to tell you this story through the Hawaiian perspective. So put that perspective on for a few minutes, put on those glasses, and look at us. We're there we are in the center of the world. I like to tell people Hawaii is on the way to anywhere. It might be a long way, but it's on the way to anywhere. And there we are in Geneva. Actually, Hawaii is 12 hours difference, which means we're on the other side of the world. I'm not sure if we win the award for coming the furthest, but it is really interesting. Right after lunch, your body is telling you it's midnight and it's time to go to sleep. But for those of you not familiar with the Hawaiian archipelago, we are a chain of islands that have been formed over the Hawaiian hotspot. These are the largest mountains in the world if you take them from their base at the sea floor. And islands have been existing here for over 50 million years if you just go up to Midway. But if you go on beyond that to the seamounts that are submerged, that go all the way up nearly to Japan, the Emperor seamounts, there have been islands here for over 160 million years. There have been some big gaps between those islands, which means that the origins of the biodiversity in Hawaii do not go back 160 million years or even 50 million years. But some of it goes back as far as 15 to 20 million years. We have one of the world's highest levels of endemism. We have 90% endemism in our angiosperms and 70% in our pteridophytes, from an original roughly estimated 230 founding lineages. Because of the difficulty in dispersing to Hawaii, but then getting between islands, and even on an island between volcanoes, we have many species who evolved into niches that are very narrow. What this graph shows you is that we have well over 400 endemic species that exist on a single volcano. And on the far right-hand side of the graph, you can see that we have very few that exist on 16 volcanoes or more. So really, species that have evolved into absolutely unique niches. Hawaii is considered one of the world's best examples of evolution and adaptive radiation. This is a great example, the Campanulaceae or bellflower family, where from a single ancestor, roughly about 12 million years ago, 125 species and 5 endemic genera have evolved from a single founder. So quite amazing diversification. The same thing took place in birds. In fact, there's a wonderful quote from Charles Darwin saying he wished he could go to the Sandwich Islands to see the evolution of the bird life that was there after he'd gotten to the Galapagos. But of course, as this chart shows you here, Hawaii is also an extinction capital of the world. We have extreme challenges from this unique biodiversity that evolved there because of the impacts of invasive species and development in the Hawaiian Islands. We have over 28,000 endemic species, and that is a low estimate because much of the insects have not really been classified that are endemic to Hawaii. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so hold on to your seatbelts as we go through a few of these amazing images of the biodiversity from the Hawaiian Islands. These are featured in a book published by National Geographic called Remains of a Rainbow. It's unfortunately out of print. Yes, and that truly is, that's no Photoshop, that's a happy face spider. Every one of these species will go extinct in our lifetime if extreme conservation efforts are not continued to be put in place. The good news is Hawaii is one of the most innovative conservation places on the planet. We have no choice. We have to be, or we will lose these species that I'm showing you today. About 1,500 years ago, the first people arrived. It was the voyaging canoes coming up from Polynesia. I believe the first canoes probably came from the Marquesas Island group, and then about 500 years later, a second migration from the Society Islands. These people evolved as part of these unique ecosystems and developed an incredible relationship with the ecosystems that they found. Part of the ethos or culture of conservation that evolved from being embedded in these ecosystems is really characterized by this Hawaiian proverb, I ola oi, I ola mako ne. My life is dependent upon yours, and your life is dependent upon mine. If only mankind globally could share this same perspective. In Hawaiian cosmology, the natural world is actually an older sibling, and so it's not an option to not conserve it and take care of it. He kupa o ka'aina means literally, I'm a sprout of the land. And this image here shows you where I was raised on the north shore of the island of Kauai, perhaps one of the most beautiful spots you'll ever see on the planet, where mountains rise from the sea up to 2,000 feet elevation. The water is pure and clean and undiverted and unpolluted. As you walk on the beaches, the jewels that we call pupu o ni'ihau, from which some of the most valuable jewelry necklaces are made in the world. The sea life is abundant. The sunsets are spectacular. And the culture is still very much intact. That culture tells us that we are part of these ecosystems, that we are ohana, that we are family, that our DNA makes us part of these systems. And in fact, our DNA drives us to conduct conservation. It's our kuleana. It's our responsibility to see that our family continues to thrive and prosper. It was no accident then that I had an opportunity to come to work for this really incredible organization, the National Tropical Botanical Garden, 42 years ago. I began there in 1976. And this organization is very unusual. You know, coming to these international meetings and I get to meet people from other national gardens, they're always quite amazed to see that I actually am the president and CEO of the National Tropical Botanical Garden, chartered by the United States Congress. They assume that we're funded by our federal government, but in fact, we get not one penny of support from our federal government, and they have not given us any land. But that was what our visionary founders wanted. They felt we would be more efficient with a donor dollar than with a government dollar, and the United States does philanthropy in such a unique way that that vision has in fact proven to be true. We now have 5 botanical gardens, including one in Florida, and 5 preserves, so 10 distinct properties, and we manage 5 different ecosystems in the Hawaiian island. We were chartered as a scientific institution in the form of a botanical garden with a mandate to conserve and study tropical plants. The alignment of this vision and this organization with the GBC is really quite phenomenal. Our mission is to enrich life through discovery, scientific research, conservation, and education by perpetuating the survival of plants, ecosystems, and cultural knowledge of tropical regions. This takes us out of the comfort zone of many botanical gardens where we can do ex situ conservation and squarely places us in the realm of biocultural conservation, working with indigenous people, perpetuating traditional cultural knowledge, ensuring that in situ conservation, that ecosystems remain intact, and that these species can continue to evolve in these systems where they belong. Virtually every target of the GSPC can be found within this mission statement. And this truly is a science of survival. I want to use the GSPC today as really the motivation for agents of change. I believe that botanic gardens have a unique opportunity and a unique responsibility to be those agents of change. We've talked a lot about that in the course of these past 5 days. And we have the ability to address the great problems that the world is facing: food security, cultural security, energy security, biosecurity. We can change the world one garden at a time. And I borrow that phrase from the American Public Garden Association, which used that as a theme for their conference about 6 years ago. The world needs us to be relevant to the issues society is facing, to be engaging and not just staying within the borders of our gardens, but reaching out beyond our borders, to be fearless, to not be intimidated by the challenges we face, and most of all, pushing the limits of what's acceptable. This is a statue, or what would you call it, from the Eden Project. It's called Wichman, and WE stands for Waste Electronic Equipment, and it is made from all of the electronic things we will dispose of in a lifetime from one individual. It's one of the most powerful statements you will ever make to drive home the message of our throwaway society and how much electronics we throw away. This is thinking outside the box. Gardens can be and should be and are navigating the way forward for our planet. So the story today is about two gardens from Hawaii, the National Tropical Botanical Garden and the Lion Arboretum, and I think it's very fitting that Lion Arboretum received one of the prizes that was just awarded. We are limited truly by our own, only our own imagination. We need to be thinking globally, but we need to be acting locally. And so it was through this lens that we created the Hawaii Strategy for Plant Conservation. And I want to recognize my colleague somewhere out there, Dr. Christopher Dunn, who about 9 years ago arrived in Hawaii. He was there for 7 years as a director of Lion Arboretum. And Christopher and I got into a lot of mischief over those 7 years. And this was one of the projects that we envisioned and catalyzed. We recognized that the GSPC was a powerful framework, and Hawaii could perhaps do a better job, but we weren't even sure where we were in terms of the targets of the GSPC. So we issued an RFP along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to figure out exactly where we were, primarily in relation to Target 8. Well, we actually came forward with an incredible assessment. Matt Cure, who received the award on behalf of Lion Arboretum, and Lauren Weisenberger, both of whom have been here for the past 5 days and are here today, did this assessment for us, and it was quite telling. It said that we had 730 taxa of conservation concern. It looked on the surface like pretty good. We were doing 524 were secured in ex situ, so we were pretty close to the 75% of Target 8. But when you looked a little bit deeper, 339 of those were rarely represented by a single accession, or certainly by less than 10% of the remaining individuals. So we only had 150 of the 730 listed on the red list. It wasn't for lack of trying, but no one was really coordinating the efforts in Hawaii, and it highlighted the urgent need for investing in micropropagation and seed bank infrastructure. The plant that Lion Arboretum received the award for, Silene perlmanii, was named after this man right here, Steve Perlman, who was my personal mentor in field work and botany. And I think this picture, to me, exemplifies the extreme work that is going on in Hawaii. We have the very best, most courageous, most talented technical experts for discovering, conserving our flora. It's not for lack of trying, and for people literally stopping at nothing other than the end of their rope in seeking to conserve plants. But we have to work smarter. We have to work more coordinated. So between 2012 and 2014, we developed the Hawaii strategy modeled off the GSPC. It took 2 years because we had multitude of partners that needed to be brought into that process. And it was an iterative, time-consuming process. Working with community can be messy. I think we all know that. But it's essential, because if those partners are not brought in to be part of that process, they will not own it in the end. And for a regional strategy for like this to be developed and be successful, it's not coming top-down, it's coming from the bottom up. For it to be successful, the partners all need to be part of it. We then took this massive strategy and broke it down into a 2-year action plan, which has already produced quite incredible results. From going from a disparate kind of everybody in its own silo, we're moving towards a more focused communication and planning that allows us to share resources across the network and be more targeted and efficient in the limited use of dollars and human resources available to the network. The name of our network, Laukahi, the Hawaii Plant Conservation Network, was very exciting to us. So the Hawaii strategy gave rise to this new network. And you can see, certainly in the past 5 days here, the impact that similar networks are having around the world. We wanted to model our work in Hawaii off of those examples. This graph shows you how this effort has really focused our red listing efforts. That graph there and the exponential rise on the right is because Laukahi and all the partners got together and said, the IUCN is coming to Hawaii. Let's get our act together and put a massive effort into red listing. And it's not stopping. So we will make the world aware of the endangerment and the status of our flora through this effort. We've created a seed bank partnership that brings together the 4 primary seed bank partners in the Hawaiian Islands, along with the relevant agencies. And they meet now regularly, sharing information on data sharing and research and equipment and supplies. So it's been phenomenal, the impact that this seed bank partnership has created. And one of the biggest problems we faced was every one of our partners had developed their databases in their own proprietary silos. It made us impossible, almost impossible, for us to evaluate the status of a species and who was managing it, how were these species being curated, and who was working on it, what was the status of the populations. Under Matt Kira's leadership, he's our coordinator for the Laukahi network, we have been able to break down those silos and finally communicate between our partners, which is a phenomenal undertaking. Many people have tried to do this over decades unsuccessfully. We've been able to frame our grant proposals and philanthropy through the lens of the Hawaii strategy and the GSPC. And as a result, just at our organization in the last 18 months, we've been able to get a new Percival growth chamber, 2 new -20 freezers, and a new -80 freezer, as well as a new position dedicated to implementing the Hawaii strategy. This is going to be transformative for our organization. And at our partner Lion Arboretum, this is a real-time picture just sent to me a couple days ago of the new micropropagation lab that's under construction. This facility holds over 26,000 plants in vitro. The rarest of the rare will be housed in this new facility at Lion Arboretum. So it's been incredibly successful to use the Hawaii strategy to bring attention of both the agencies and NGO community, but even more importantly, the philanthropic community to support the preservation of our unique species. But as we've heard again and again, starting with Krystina Saint-Pierre, there's a bigger picture. In fact, Dr. Peter Wyse Jackson will follow me today talking about what is the future of the GSPC. And we've heard about, the importance of the ACHI targets, the CBD, and of course now the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. What is that bigger picture? Because plant conservation, plants are just part of ecosystems. We need to be looking at our work in the bigger context of conservation of the world's biodiversity. So Christopher and I, again, we got together and, what could we do that would be catalytic, that would just completely transform conservation in Hawaii and around the world? And we decided to do something that they said could never be done, to bring the IUCN World Conservation Congress into Hawaii. We started that in late 2008, and in early 2009, we flew to Washington to meet with the U.S. Department of State. They were very cordial and polite, and in a very, they thought a very dismissive way, they informed us that the IUCN World Congress has never been in Hawaii in the 70-year history of IUCN, nor will it ever be there for political reasons. So thank you for our thoughts, but please go on your way. We're pretty irreverent when it comes to people telling us no if we know that it's going to be transformational for conservation. I don't have time to tell you the entire story of that journey, but let it just be said that it has been transformational. On the eve of the beginning of the World Congress on September 1st last year, our president flew out to Hawaii to meet with the leaders of IUCN to announce the expansion of Papahanaumokuakea. Let me go back there. There's a written exam on the pronunciation and spelling of this name, so I hope you all are writing it down quickly. This became the world's largest marine protected area in the world. And the World Conservation Congress, the world convening in Hawaii, inspired our president to fly out there and make that announcement. This was the evening before the beginning of the Congress. That night, he flew to Midway, where with Sylvia Earle, he announced this transformational event. And of course, his inspiration was to challenge other countries to outdo it. We do not want to hold the title of the world's largest marine protected area. We want to be an instigator to cause other countries to do even better. That morning, we set the stage for the World Congress to ensure that they knew where they were. Place is critically important, and that's why I started my talk through the Hawaii perspective. It was a powerful beginning to a Congress that was the largest environmental gathering in the history of the planet. 10,300 delegates from 192 countries. It was phenomenal, with the icons of the conservation world. We had an audacious dream of making this Congress a green Congress. We built it out of cardboard so it could be recycled. I thought this was a totally crazy idea. I could see people sitting on a cardboard bench and falling through to the ground, but it actually was incredibly successful. But the most powerful moments for me were the members' assembly, where the delegates from 192 countries debated resolutions setting the environmental agenda for the future of our planet. It was a robust and emotional and fulfilling and exciting discussion as the votes were shown in real time on the screen. It was an amazing technology that IUCN used for this Congress. And in the end, everybody left totally inspired that, in fact, we have the greatest challenges the world has ever seen, but together there's nothing that we cannot accomplish. Coming out of that, the IUCN adopted the Hawaii Commitments. These are globally transformative commitments, and this statement came out of it. This could be a statement that comes out of our Congress here today. The situation is urgent, and a transformation is needed in the boldness of our aspirations, the strength of our efforts, and the weight of our investments. That rings true no matter where you come from in the world. So the question I would ask you, and this was the question I kept asking myself over those 8 years, is I never had any doubt that we would host the best World Congress the world had ever seen. The question is, when the circus blew out of town, what was the legacy that was left behind? And will it have been catalytic and transformed conservation in Hawaii? And I have to tell you, I had some serious doubts. In 2014, that man on the right was our champion. The World Congress is hosted by countries. We did not get the United States to support hosting the World Congress. The governor of Hawaii conspired with me to submit our bid under the government of Hawaii as if we were a sovereign country of the world. Eventually, the United States found out about it, and in fact, President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry did support our application on the condition that Hawaii was the host. He goes down in history as the only governor in the history of the state of Hawaii to not get reelected. He was a conservation champion. And he was replaced by the man on the left, David Ige. Ige was a businessman representing the Old Boys Network. And his appointment to the State Department of Land and Natural Resources, the agency that oversees conservation in the Hawaiian Islands, was a political lobbyist for a land developer. That galvanized our conservation community unlike anything I've ever seen. 600 people testified against his appointment. He learned his lesson. And in the next 2 years, he learned about the world coming, and he became a changed man. As he stood on the stage at the closing of the World Conservation Congress, he made commitments to Hawaii to protect 30% of our highest priority watersheds by 2030, to double food production by 2020, to effectively manage 30% of our nearshore ocean waters by 2030, and create the first ever interagency biosecurity plan for the state of Hawaii. These were transformational catalytic commitments from a man who just 2 years earlier thought conservation was a dirty word. He is also committed to 100% renewable energy by 2045. So this is really transformational. And just a few weeks ago, he signed the very first, when our president pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, within days, Governor Ige was signing legislation binding Hawaii to commit and uphold the Paris Accord. So he has become, recognized the role he can play as a global leader for the country. And in 2 weeks from here, he will serve with me on a panel about how to inspire conservation globally. So he has become completely transformed through the power of this one event. So I tell you this because gardens can be agents of change. Gardens can make a difference. And BGCI and the 3,000 gardens internationally are having an impact globally. Thank you for allowing me to share our stories with you today. Aloha.
Inspiring stuff. Right, we're going to stay with the global strategy theme, and I'm going to invite our very own Peter Wyse Jackson to come up and tell us about how we ensure the future of plant conservation and take the global strategy for plant conservation forward beyond 2020. Peter.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What a pleasure to be here at the end of what has been a remarkable week for all of us. And my congratulations to our host and to BGCI for wonderful, wonderful work and arrangements. I always come back from these events truly inspired to go forward with the work that we need to do. So much I've learned from all of you that I now want to put into practice in my own garden at the Missouri Botanical Garden, and also to be inspired by remarkable leaders like Chipper and his presentation just now. What Paul has asked me to do is to talk about the work we can do to ensure the future of plant conservation, taking forward our global framework, the global strategy for plant conservation beyond 2020, indeed taking it beyond to 2020 and then onwards from that. But let me look back for a moment at where the global strategy for plant conservation has come from. It was adopted by the Convention on Biological Diversity, as we remember, in 2002, following a couple of years of negotiations and cajoling and political action, which resulted in a small community, the botanical community, involving botanic gardens, having this global framework adopted by 189 government delegations worldwide, absolutely unanimously, agreeing to every target that it contained, which was a remarkable change and victory for plant conservation and for this community. It was updated in 2010 for the period to 2020, containing, as we know, the 16 targets to halt the loss of plant diversity by 2020. I suspect if we were to do a written test like Chipper, most of you would get 100% writing down exactly what each of the targets are about, because it has become our shorthand. We're all working in Target 8 or Target 1, and the progress, bemoaning the progress we don't make in a particular target or whatever. And that is a wonderful sense of we're working from the same framework, from the same agenda, wherever we are in the world. we can be very proud as well of the key role that has been played by Botanic Gardens in its adoption. Without the work of Botanic Gardens Conservation International right up to the present time, the global strategy for plant conservation would not be the success that it has been. It was a remarkable new development in that it contained the first ever international outcome targets ever adopted for biodiversity conservation. That was remarkable in that up to that time, throughout the international negotiations, governments said, we don't want to have international targets because they will be used to measure our performance. Well, the global strategy for plant conservation broke that mold and resulted now today that there are targets in so many fields in biodiversity conservation. But it was also extremely important in that it provided us with a unifying strategy for the Botanic Garden community, providing us with, as I've said, a series of principles and objectives, and providing us with recognition on the international scale and at national levels too, a rationale for the work that we do in biodiversity conservation for the first time. It also saw the establishment of a global partnership for plant conservation, which was created and launched in 2004 to support the worldwide implementation of the global strategy for plant conservation. It now has more than 50 member organizations. BGCI provides the secretariat for it, and it works to support implementation of the GSPC around the world. And you can see, if you can see this slide, many of the members of the partnership are Botanic Gardens, many with international programs. What is also important about this strategy is that it has a mandate from the Biodiversity Convention to help coordinate and monitor the global strategy for plant conservation. So really, at the first time, we have a seat, an equal seat with governments to negotiate on the future of plant conservation. And we can also be very proud and celebrate indeed the way that the global strategy for plant conservation has been transformative. I believe that it has certainly contributed to the remarkable growth in the number and diversity of botanic gardens that have been created around the world in recent years, finding new reasons for being, finding agendas for which they can contribute to their own communities, to their own countries, to the world at large too. Because the global strategy for plant conservation has truly become a grassroots movement for our involvement in plant conservation. And over the years, plant conservation through our botanic gardens has also become much more complex, much more effective too, in that we no longer perhaps focus on individual plants growing in our gardens with one eye on species, but we're now involved in all levels of diversity conservation, from genes right through to ecosystems. And equally, we are using the total sum of our resources in our gardens, combining our work in horticulture with science, with education, with advocacy, with managing knowledge and making it available to ensure conservation and indeed restoration of individual species and ecosystems. Some years ago, a couple of years ago, the Biodiversity Convention decided to undertake a mid-term review on the GSPC. And this was largely led by the information that came from members of the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation. The mid-term review was coordinated by, much of it written by Suzanne Sharrock for BGCI. And it looked at the progress that had been made on each of the GSPC targets, and are we on track to achieve the targets by 2020? The assessment is based on 5 levels, that we're on track to exceed a target, that's 5, that we're on track to achieve the target, 4, and then other lower levels such as progress, 3, where we are making significant progress towards the target, but not sufficient to achieve it by 2020. Moving down to 2, where really not enough progress is being made to change the situation, and 1 where the situation is getting even worse. So each one of the targets was assessed to see how we are moving forward. Looking at the first 8 targets, the assessment suggested that target 1, an online flora of all known plants, is set to be achieved by 2020, which is very encouraging indeed. Now, that is a challenge for us to do so. But almost every other target in the first 8 that I've shown shows significant progress has been made towards the ultimate destination for 2020. But if we don't raise our game, if we don't take new actions, we will miss every one of these other targets by 2020. In the same way, when we look at the targets 9 to 16, again, very significant progress has been made on most of the targets, but again, there isn't a single target that we are set from this standpoint to achieve unless we make significant new efforts and can raise our game in botanic gardens and beyond in relation to plant conservation. Some of them, we're still struggling to make even significant progress. And we also are faced with a situation where, when we first negotiated the global strategy for plant conservation, we didn't even calculate or consider what were the impacts of climate change on how those targets would be achieved. And I like this quote from the French poet and philosopher Paul Valéry: "The trouble with our time is that the future isn't what it used to be." So we're now having to look from a different standpoint, that the future is not what we expected it to be, but that as a result of climate change, it will be even more difficult to achieve these targets rather than being able to rely on the status quo. And so really we understand that now if we are to achieve these targets by 2020, Botanic Gardens will need to do even more than they have ever done before to achieve plant conservation. And we can do that by planning and analyzing what we are doing. We can set further GSPC targets and milestones for our own institutions and for our networks too, and identify the gaps that are not being addressed and try to fill them. We also see, of course, that we fit into a much broader context. We fit into a world where there are huge global challenges, which has been talked about very extensively at this Congress. We will need to feed at least 9 billion people on the planet by 2020. We need to sustain biodiversity with and secure the ecosystem services and functions provided by biodiversity and the environment. We need to guarantee health care for all and address unsustainable livelihoods. We need to tackle the continuing and growing water crisis. We need to address inequalities of gender, income, education. We need to tackle climate change. And as we heard this morning, we need to work out how can we mitigate and adapt to it, to the inevitability of it. We also need to look at how do we adapt to greater incidence of extreme weather, and the fact that we often operate in profound political and social instability and turmoil. And so the context of our work is more complex than if we simply focused on plant conservation. But I would argue, and I believe you would probably all agree, that to do so, To ignore any of these aspects would be to reduce the impact that we can play and need to play as a great resource for the planet that is the Botanic Garden community. And we are, of course, now delighted that there is such an excellent, such a revolutionary new agenda for sustainable development that has been adopted through the United Nations process. It is set to shape the future biodiversity conservation policies and frameworks. It will have, I believe, a profound impact on policies adopted at all levels worldwide, and therefore I believe the Botanic Garden community has an opportunity and responsibility also to adopt similar priorities so that we can move forward to make contributions to achieving the 17 global goals that are included in the Sustainable Development Agenda. We have seen through this Congress that there are clear links between plant conservation and many of the Sustainable Development Goals, using plants to address poverty, to address hunger and food security, to provide good health, to provide us with resources for renewable energy, to take forward responsible consumption, to take climate action, and so on. The goal 15, life on land, is of course central to biodiversity conservation, but our work for Sustainable Development Goals can and should go way beyond that. When we look at certain targets under the level of each of individual goals, there are also specific actions that we can take in plant conservation and in botanic gardens to address, for example, sustainable cities and communities. And it is really very notable that when we look at the framework provided by the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, that current objectives and targets of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation don't fully address all of the aspects that we will need to consider in the Sustainable Development Agenda. And so there is therefore a need to review and update the GSPC in the light of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that needs to go forward over the coming year or two. There is a paper which I hope many of you have obtained a copy of on plant conservation and the Sustainable Development Goals, a policy paper written by Suzanne Sharrock and myself, and there are copies of that at the BGCI desk, so please do help yourself to it, and it will be available electronically too. But it tries to look at some of the detailed aspects of how we can link plant conservation and the SDGs. I believe that refining the objectives and targets of the GSPC post-2020 and up to 2030 and beyond will also be a very essential part in continuing to mobilize our botanic gardens worldwide to continue their support for the Convention on Biological Diversity, which has been so important up to now, but also because we expect the Biodiversity Convention is going to align its work and its future much more on the Sustainable Development Agenda and its goals too. But no matter how important is sustainable development, I believe we should never lose sight of the fact that the primary responsibility of our botanic gardens is to safeguard plant diversity. Fundamentally, that is our role. Most of you will know that the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity that was adopted by the Convention on Biological Diversity in 2010 and included the Aichi Biodiversity Targets for 2020 provides a valuable framework for biodiversity conservation, not only through the Convention itself, but for the whole United Nations system. We were very gratified in 2010 that the GSPC was formally recognized as an important component of that strategic plan and the framework of measurable outcome-orientated targets in the GSPC provided the model for the Aichi biodiversity targets. Excuse me. Okay. And so that there was a recognition within the Biodiversity Convention that the GSPC provided a very valuable model which can be used again in the period after 2020. And I was thrilled to see the welcome to all of you that was written by the Executive Secretary to the Convention on Biological Diversity, Krystina Pasca-Palmer. And it's well worth reading her words very carefully in your program for this Congress, because she said, as part of an invitation, that I encourage you to reflect on the future of the GSPC and on your vision on how Botanic Gardens community can effectively participate and contribute to the implementation of biodiversity-related conventions. We have a firm invitation to participate in the negotiations to take the strategic plan forward beyond 2020. Reflecting on the future of the GSPC is interesting, because she doesn't say that we should help to plan the GSPC, but reflect on its future. I hope that that doesn't mean that they don't see a future for the GSPC past 2020, and we need to make darn sure that that is not the case. She also wrote in the welcome, she wrote, "What may have initially been launched to establish a foothold for the botanical community has matured into a recognition that botanic gardens are major contributors to implementation across all aspects of the convention process." Well, I entirely agree with that about the implementation by botanic gardens being of major importance. But I'm not sure I fully agree that this process was to gain a foothold for the botanical community. It was instead an attempt to gain a foothold for plants in the Convention on Biological Diversity for the first time. And I believe that if we don't keep this focus on plants through the GSPC post-2020, we may be in danger of plants becoming lost once again and overlooked. And so we have a need to be very active in ensuring that the GSPC is considered and renewed and updated for the period post-2020. A notification was issued by the CBD Secretariat on the 15th of June, just a week or two ago, on preparations for a post-2020 strategic plan. And the document said that submissions on the future of the strategic plan would be needed to be received by the convention, the Secretariat, no later than the 15th of September this year. I can assure you that the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation will be putting in its views on the need for updating the GSPC and in the light of the Sustainable Development Goals and future priorities, and submitting that for consideration. However, the GSPC, BGCI, and individual botanic gardens alone cannot achieve what we need to, because all decisions of the convention are made in relation to government decisions, the delegations from governments at the COP, where they decide what is to be the future of CBD programs. And we need you, botanic gardens that are connected with your national authorities, to become champions to ensure that your national delegations go to the Conference of the Parties with a very strong recommendation on the need to take forward the GSPC, not only in recognition that it is a grassroots movement amongst the botanical community and way beyond it, and botanic gardens, but that it needs to be linked firmly to future government policies and policy frameworks. Otherwise, plant conservation is in danger of becoming a sectional interest only and being sidelined in the CBD process. We need to make sure that that will not happen. But a key to the success on how we implement the GSPC and it will be the individual, institutional and network responses to it. What we do in our own daily lives, what we do in our gardens, what we do at home, what we do with our networks will be the means to achieve the GSPC, the means to achieve that the future of it will be secure too. The Convention on Biological Diversity in 2014 called for the development of more national partnerships for plant conservation, as well as regional partnerships too. And Chipper's example from Hawaii is just the sort of model that was being suggested by the Convention. And there is still many more opportunities for you to take forward the development of national partnerships for plant conservation in your own gardens, in your own countries too, drawing in all of the relevant stakeholders to deliver the GSPC by 2020 and beyond. So in conclusion, what do I believe is needed next for the GSPC? I believe we need to recast it for the period 2020 to 2030 and beyond, linking plant conservation very fundamentally with the Sustainable Development Goals and a new post-2020 biodiversity strategy that the Convention will adopt. We need to mainstream plant conservation more into biodiversity initiatives. It is remarkable still how few national plant conservation strategies have been adopted by governments around the world, and we need to lobby for more of those to be developed and then play our part in implementing them, as well as to ensure that plants are increasingly incorporated into national biodiversity strategies and action plans. We need to continue to build more partnerships at the regional, national and local level, and strengthen our networks and continue the wonderful work that BGCI does in helping to develop these networks at all levels and build new capacity for plant conservation throughout them. We also all struggle to get the resources we need to do the plant conservation work we know is important. So we'll have to be increasingly effective in making the case to governments and the donor agencies for new resources for plant conservation, showing why it is important and that we can deliver real outcomes and build the capacity, particularly in countries where the need is most urgent. We need to carry out more research so that our conservation activities are effective. And we need to develop our own individual plant conservation programs and meet those 2020 targets. This Congress has provided a wonderful and timely opportunity to evaluate our progress towards the goals and the priorities and progress in your own regions and indeed throughout the world. I think we should celebrate that we have come a very long way from 2002 when the GSPC was first adopted. But as we take it forward, we will remember that we need to consider what has worked and build on that, what hasn't worked and work out the reasons why it hasn't worked, and refocus our priorities and strategies to set our goals for 2020, and so that we can secure the essential GSPC framework in the post-2020 period. And remember that we will be successful if we do our best ourselves, because the future is ours to create. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you for that. We now know what we have to do. And it's therefore fitting that next we're going to hear about BGCI's mission and future priorities. Before we do that, we're going to run a video for you that sets out really what BGCI does and also really as a short celebration of the past 30 years.
The establishment of Botanic Gardens Conservation International in 1987 was a real milestone for the international botanic garden community. When botanic gardens were first created, they were primarily focused on growing exotic plants. Over the last few decades since the establishment of BGCI, they have become so much more focused on native plant diversity.
They have a history going back hundreds of years, but they've really grasped the conservation challenge over the past 30 years.
When BGCI was established, there were somewhat less than 800 botanic gardens. Today, there are almost 3,000 botanic gardens worldwide.
The fundamental point about a botanic garden is it grows plants, and these plants are then available for all kinds of use, for study, for research, for conservation, for exploitation, and so on. And what is more, they have helped public appreciation of the dilemma of plant conservation and helped people understand the importance of plants on the one hand and the consequences if we lose plant diversity on the other hand.
The loss of plant diversity is important because it reduces our options. For many of these plant species, we don't know their function, we don't know how they can be useful. The breadth of plant diversity gives us opportunities, human innovation, adaptation, and resilience. BGCI, since it started 30 years ago, has seen the degradation of the environment get worse, not better. We're understanding more and more the impacts of climate change. We've transformed 50% of the terrestrial landscape, largely for agriculture, but also for urbanization. We're losing plant species at an accelerated rate. That means the problem is even more urgent today. It isn't enough to tell the world that there's a problem. We need to be deploying our 60,000 horticulturists, scientists, educators outside our garden walls to work with society to solve these problems.
We've just completed the first world list of trees, Global Tree Search.
We're safeguarding plant diversity for the future by collecting and banking seed.
We're creating an early warning system for new and emerging pests and diseases to protect plant life.
I want to inspire people to appreciate and learn about plants.
We have the Global Tree Assessment looking at the threat to species. We have the Global Trees Campaign, action on the ground. We have the Global Seed Conservation Challenge, collecting and storing seeds against extinction. The Ecological Restoration Alliance. Well, our roadmap is the global strategy for plant conservation. That is the overarching plan that we have there. And BGCI's role really is coordinating action within that framework. So it's about connecting people, it's about sharing knowledge, and ultimately about saving plants. Connecting people isn't just about connecting our own community through our congresses, through our publications and so on. It's also about working with broader society. So for example, the Global Trees Campaign, all of our projects work with local communities where tree species are in trouble.
Well, I'm very proud and excited about the Global Trees Campaign, which is identifying which tree species are most threatened with extinction and then planning action to make sure that they are effectively conserved.
So this is April the 17th, 2017. We're at the head of the Dangchu Valley. We're climbing our first tree in the 2017 seed collecting expedition for the Sendon Conservation Project.
These are mature cones that we're targeting, which I suspect will be at least 2 years old.
This tree is about 53 metres high, and we've got two tree climbers, one in each tree on the left and the right, throwing down branches and collecting seed. The seed is for a conservation project in the Dangchu Valley where they're looking to establish new forests throughout their village lands. It's a village community project.
What you need to do is very carefully take them out of your backpack and put them in.
BGCI works with Botanic Gardens to provide training, support and techniques in public engagement. Public engagement is important to all of BGCI's work because if we want to make a difference in plant conservation, then we need to change attitudes and we need people to take ownership of their local areas and local species and understand the difference that they can make.
The sharing knowledge is about our training. We train hundreds of people each year in plant conservation policy, practice and education. But it's also about the data services that we provide. Our database is plant search, threat search, global tree search.
Global tree search is a list of 60,065 trees, species, which are all of the world's trees and their country level distributions. Without a list of the world's trees, we don't know what we need to prioritise and what needs conservation action to ensure that no tree species goes extinct.
So the end result of that data sharing is that we can say to Botanic Gardens, you have these threatened species within your sphere, within your neighbourhood. What are you going to do about it and how can we help you to conserve them?
I'm here in Baja California Sur, Mexico, researching an endangered oak species called Quercus brandegii. It only occurs in this small location on the Baja California Peninsula, and researchers have noticed that there are no new trees growing in the wild. This puts it at risk of extinction. So we're here investigating what is preventing regeneration in the wild in order to protect this species in the future.
So the International Plant Sentinel Network is an early warning system for new and emerging pests and diseases. With the increased globalisation of trade, lots more pests and diseases are coming in on plant material.
This insect, Asian longhorn beetle, is an example of one of the pests that we're working hard to try and keep out of the UK. It's been introduced to North America over the last probably 20 years or so and has caused the loss of literally millions of trees. And oak processionary moth is an example of a pest which is not only damaging to trees but also damaging to human and animal health.
The International Plant Sentinel Network supports plant health research in Botanic Gardens and Arboreta. Some of the things that we do is provide training resources, so this is help on biosecurity or general plant health identification, and in that way we can instigate good management of those organisms, so we can either eradicate them, contain them, or, which is the preferable method, is we can prevent them from coming in the first place.
So we're engaging with Botanic Gardens to really work outside their garden walls to collect and conserve species that are threatened. It'll help conservation because by seed banking you have a safeguard, so if the species becomes extinct in the wild, you have that seed to be able to restore the natural habitats.
This kind of integrated plant conservation is exemplified by a project we have in Malawi at the moment, conserving the Mulanje cedar, Malawi's national tree. That involves collecting the seeds, storing them in the seed bank, but then growing them in nurseries for reintroduction back onto the mountain where that particular plant lives. The reason I love working at BGCI is summed up in two words: passion and potential. I meet passionate people all over the world, passionate about plants and particularly the plants that they know a great deal about. But I think as a network, as this wonderful network of expertise, we have tremendous potential to do something really significant.
BGCI really punches above its weight. It makes an enormous difference for plant conservation.
If we are to succeed in safeguarding the plant diversity of the world in the future, we will need to have strong botanic gardens and continued great leadership from BGCI.
There's no technological reason why any plant species should become extinct. I want to be able to look my daughter in the eye and say that I did everything humanly possible about the loss of plant diversity.
The thing that inspires me to work with Botanic Gardens and Arboreta is the people. They're trained, they're passionate, and they're a joy to work with.
I just really love plants and being able to actually do some work that's making a difference in conservation and working for the future.
And my former professor, Vernon Hayward, spoke there, and I have to say that every time I hear Vernon's voice, he'll be 90 this year, I feel truly inspired by what I learnt from him, and I know I've got to try to do a good job. I'd like to start, though, by congratulating Pierre-André and everybody involved in the team. I know it's been a big team for bringing us together here at this meeting. I know you'll all agree it's just been a truly wonderful Congress, and it's clear, in fact, that this series of meetings goes from strength to strength. And for me, it's the first time I've ever been to Geneva, first time in Switzerland, and it felt very special to be here while you were celebrating this important bicentenary. And I've been really impressed by our visits to the garden and to those members of staff I've interacted with. But the greatest learning, and I've learned a lot, and inspiration has come from this Congress itself. It's been really quite remarkable. For example, downstairs, just the array of posters which give such encouraging stories and hope for the future. And indeed, so many new botanic gardens being developed and emerge. Our community is getting stronger. And then excellent presentations both here in the plenary sessions and in the various many meetings we've had during our time. Some of those really touched me. I worked in Malawi myself when I was in my 20s and could never imagine that the Mananji cedar could be reduced to just 7 individuals in the wild. We saw it in the film just now. But every time we think of the threats and challenges we face in the world, we find that botanic gardens are doing something about it and are on the first step, at least, towards a solution. So to hear that there are in fact now 300,000 seedlings of that species in 10 community nurseries, for me was a nice illustration of the hope that comes out of botanic gardens. And equally during this conference I've heard quite often of the effects and impacts of climate change, which we're still attempting to estimate more clearly what the future will be like, but we're already hearing about extreme weather events, flooding, plants being destroyed by ice storms, this kind of thing. But again, there have been wonderful case studies here of how we are building up and sharing the knowledge on how to deal with them. I particularly enjoyed an example from Auckland of the use of native species in developing ecological based adaptation solutions, which then, having been seen in the garden, were picked up and used more widely by the local government. Again, little indicators of the kinds of influence we've just been hearing about. To me, I was not surprised, but very pleased to see frequent mention to the Sustainable Development Goals by Christian Samper at the beginning, Marie Hager, Her Royal Highness Princess Basma showed how they're being worked on in Jordan, and again this morning, Peter in particular greatly emphasized them. That is the international framework for action now to achieve the future that we want and that our children deserve. So I'm certain it'll be the focus for all of our work as we go forward into the future. And there's been so much in this conference which indicates that. As you know, and you've just heard from BGCI, our mission is to mobilize botanic gardens and to engage partners in securing plant diversity for the well-being of people and the planet. That's a good expression of what we do, but what does that look like? Well, it looks like what I can see from up here. It looks like the world's botanic gardens coming together to do amazing things. But I just want to briefly tell you about the idea that we're developing and discussing, which, if you like, might represent the biggest ambition that BGCI has ever had, which is to try to establish a rational, cost-effective global system for the conservation and management of all plant diversity. Now, you might recognize that I've echoed words you heard earlier in the week from Marie Hager, because indeed the Crop Trust and its framework for the conservation of our food resources is very much something we want to emulate and to parallel. Now, Paul has written a wonderful article which was in a recent edition of the journal Siboldia, setting out that idea of a global system. It's going to be an even bigger challenge than the challenge faced by the crop community. But I want to emphasize that we just firmly believe that this is something we can do and that only Botanic Gardens could put in place. And we can do it, as BGCI works, by mobilizing and engaging partners. In other words, BGCI is not going to create a global system, but together we all are. Food Forever was described to us during the week as being a coalition of the willing. But the more I reflected on this conference, I realized that taking care to save all plants needs what we actually have here, which is a coalition of the more than willing, of the passionate and the enthusiastic, is going to take that. My confidence in the success of that long-term mission comes from having known the successive Secretary Generals, and we've just heard from them, and having seen BGCI's small but amazingly effective team of staff and the contribution they make over the years. But secondly, my confidence comes from the strengths and achievements of BGCI's membership, individual gardens and institutions. In the time I've known the Botanic Garden community, it's clear that what we've been doing is becoming more joined up, more strategic, working together more than ever in the past. We've heard repeatedly in this session this morning of the impact and the scale of impact we can have. And I know that we're going to be able to do even better than that as we go forward. We've been working in BGCI in the past couple of years to grow our number of members quite significantly. Now, that matters to us because the more members we have, and by the way, I'm meaning paid up, fully subscribed members in particular, the more we have, the more effective we can be in representing this community and putting our concerns onto the global stage. I've been really pleased to see that growth in membership now. And for example, just to mention that we now have 15 patron-level member gardens from around the world. When I joined the board some years ago, there were just 2. And that, I think, shows this increasing commitment and engagement with BGCI's processes. But we know that for more members to come in, we need to do more for our membership. And I want to just emphasize how much we've been working on, especially you'll have seen through our online resources. And we've heard a lot about the various databases that BGCI runs. And now I'm going to just mention that if you look at the members area, you'll see that they're developing special tools that relate to those databases. But have a think about how fundamental those databases are to achieving a global system. For example, Garden Search, which now has reference to 3,391 botanic gardens. That was last week, maybe there are more by now. Plant Search with 1.4 million collection records searchable and 500,000 taxa held in more than 1,000 institutions. So while our challenge is enormously big compared to that in the Crop Trust's world, nevertheless we are putting in place resources which will take us in that direction. Threat Search, the most comprehensive database of conservation assessments for plants, more than 240,000 entries so far. Global Tree Search, which has been a wonderful recent achievement, and we've heard a lot in the media around the world about that, and the world's more than 60,000 tree species. Those are the informatic platforms we're going to need as we go forward. And each of those will play an ever more important role as we move towards this emergence of a global system. I don't imagine you can create something like that overnight, but we are already moving towards it happening. And that will make us more strategic and more targeted as we go forward, following the processes that Peter outlined before me of working with the major conventions to make certain that our voice continues to be heard. I think the Botanic Gardens can do things that no other community can, whether it is from restoration, urban greening, and many of the pressing challenges of our time. And just in this morning's sessions, I think Chipper and Peter in particular have really reminded us with some choice examples just how amazing that transformation can be, including the transformation of our political leaders, a story I really liked. And that is a challenge for some of us, isn't it? So when I reflect on everything that I've heard and learned during this Congress, I really feel certain that, thank you very much, Geneva, for hosting a turning point and an important milestone towards the achievement of even greater things. I think our Botanic Garden community is bigger than we imagine sometimes, is more impactful than we imagine when we think about our own individual gardens. But together we will shape this better place and this better future that is encapsulated in the visions and dreams behind the Sustainable Development Goals. And our commitment from BGCI, from its board and its staff, is that we will do our utmost to deliver whatever part of that we can. And thank you for your membership, your support, and most of all, thank you for what you all do in your Botanic Gardens. Thanks.
Well, that's a very useful segue into our next speaker. As Steve says, our strength is our members. It's all of you. And we at BGCI are very privileged that we have members who are willing to do this kind of thing. I know if we asked Pierre-André to do it again next week, he'd probably say no. But I know that he's enjoyed it, and it's been really important for all of us. The roadshow goes on, of course, and next year we will have the Botanic Gardens Education Congress in Warsaw, and I'd like to invite Krystina Jedrzejewska up here to tell us all about that. And please, apologies if I mangled your surname.
Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here. We had an intense and inspiring week here in Geneva. Thank you. During yesterday's gala dinner, some of friends told us we should come up here and dance to make you remember us and to make sure that you will come to the next BGCI Congress on Education in Botanical Gardens to be held in Poland.
Yeah, but then in the morning we thought it's not such a good idea. So please let me present you in a couple words what will be going on in Warsaw in September 2018. Well, there will be various interesting talks, hands-on workshops, many discussions and roundtables, all connected to the themes of the Congress. One of them is the interconnection between gardens and cities, and what the gardens offer to their urban audiences, what kind of difficulties they face, how to address challenges and advantages of their location in their educational programs. The second one is working together, where the garden is understood as a hub linking various groups of people, gardeners, curators, educators, researchers, but also people from outside of the institution, different actors, NGOs, other institutions, policymakers, artists, local communities. And the third one is research and evaluation, because different methods of research and evaluation provide us evidence of the impact of Botanic Gardens' educational work and help us to better meet people's needs and expectations. So there's much more to come.
So, have you looked through your Congress bags, and did you find a small leaflet? You will find there the information about Congress venue, important dates, Congress themes, costs, and what else is coming in the next Educational Congress. We promise you it will be engaging, inspiring, interactive, and fun. So please mark the dates in your calendars for the next Congress. We hope to see you in Warsaw from 9th to 14th September 2018 during the next Educational Congress.
Thank you.
We're next going to hear from Tim Entwisle about the next time we run this Congress in 3.5 years' time. He's going to tell us where that is and what that's going to look like. Tim.
Thank you, Paul, and it's possibly the worst kept secret. I don't know if anyone in the room doesn't know where it's going to, but I come from Melbourne, by the way, in Australia, and it's quite possible the next Congress will be held in Melbourne. It's a long way to go, so I'm going to have to show you a little bit more to sell this to you. But first of all, Pierre-André has set the bar so high that I've already started panicking about what we will do. He's going to send me his 3,000 emails. Do you remember him mentioning that early on in the Congress? That will help us get in the mood for preparing it. But let me just invite you to Melbourne, and particularly to join us in celebrating our 175th anniversary, 25 years back from where we are here, but a very significant event for us in Melbourne. You'll see two extraordinary gardens, Melbourne Gardens, a rich heritage garden, and Cranbourne Gardens, a new garden just outside of Melbourne. Melbourne Gardens, wonderful traditional collections, plants. We even grow our Titan arum. I mean, you know, everyone has to have one of those, I know. But when that's all brought together, it's that landscape. One, I think, of the most beautiful botanical garden landscapes in the world. Cranbourne Gardens, prize winning in 2013, voted the best landscape in the world in Singapore. It is an amazing place to visit, amongst 300 hectares of bushland as well, or forest, and there is a beautifully designed garden. This is one of the iconic visions from that garden. Do come and see that if you want to see where Botanic Gardens are heading into the future. National Herbarium of Victoria, 1.5 million preserved plant specimens, a centre of science within Melbourne, Victoria and Australia, of course. Lots of public programming and events, so that will be a strong focus for us in the Congress. An authentic and strong focus on Indigenous culture and on heritage. You'll be welcomed to country by traditional custodians, but we'll also embed cultures old and new within our program through that Congress. City life, of course. Melbourne is known for its music, its laneways, its trams even as well, and particularly for the vineyards, wine, and the best coffee in the world. So not only the best botanical landscape, but the best coffee. If there are any Italians in the audience, we'll have that discussion afterwards. But it's the Italian immigrants that brought it to Australia, I should point out. Surf and sand, plenty to do outside of the cities if you're there. And also tall trees, the tallest flowering plants in the world, tall tree ferns, and even tall mosses for those of you interested in the smaller parts of the plant world. And not just plants, of course, many of these you'll recognise. I was going to put a picture of a platypus there, but I thought the Europeans will doubt it and won't think it actually exists, so I've just put animals that Europeans understand there. Sorry, an old joke there. But, and our theme for 2021, just to get you thinking, Botanic Gardens as provocation. We'll do some thinking about what that means and how we'll embed that into the themes. We're thinking particularly of how gardens provoke, how they respond, how we interact and reflect what's going on around us. So start thinking about Botanic Gardens as provocation. You'll see, you've heard a little bit of provocation this morning. I think it's something we'd love to focus on in 2021. So see you there in 2021. The dates are 7th to 11th of February. I do have a little short video I'll have to show, or I'll get into big trouble. Now, how do I press something on that? Oh, it's going to come automatically. All right. This is just a 2.5-minute video. This is what the experience in Melbourne.
Great. Well, that looks fantastic. Looking forward to it already. Pierre-André, do you want to come up with me? Do you want the first word or the last word?
I can do the, yes, okay. So I have just some thanks to add. I did a lot during all this Congress, but I have to add 4 new ones. The first is for the staff of this center, the second for the staff of the restaurant, the third for the technical staff of the company Lumen 8, and the last one for the traductors who did an excellent job. Thank you very much. We have had a fantastic Congress, rich, interesting, and friendly. And I would like to thank you all for having come and to have been so kind with us. See you in Warsaw or in Melbourne, and I wish you all a safe trip home.
Well, as Pierre-André has reminded me, my only official duty left is to officially close this Congress. Thank you all so much.